Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barco, a teacher in Socialist Andalusian and Socialist and community organizer Kenny Cepeda. Today, we are joined by a panel of socialists from around the world to be able to hold this discussion so that we can have finally our ideas and our shared ideas around what we make of the pandemic, as well as the recent events that we've been discussing in this this ongoing saga that we've been discussing on reopening and everything in between. Today we are joined by Adam from Workers' League, based in Brisbane, Australia.
Hi, hello.
Tom from New York, currently in Germany and active in the Free Left, Freie, Linke.
Hi.
David Fletcher from Left Lockdown Sceptics in the UK.
Hi there.
AJ Johnston, revolutionary socialist and teacher in San Francisco. And of course, our lovely two co-hosts, Kenny Cepeda and Andy Lawson.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, folks.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise.
And just to say, this reason that we wanted to put this together was because really it's been the socialist response to COVID and what's been going on with the lockdowns has been extremely disappointing. And it's been really, I've been very grateful to meet fellow socialists from around the world, really, who've been able to share their thoughts on this. And we thought would be a good idea for people to hear that there are socialists who oppose what's going on and just to see where they're coming from.
Yeah, we've been wanting to do this for a while, and we're very just excited to have you all. This is this time around for an isolating time politically. So let's start off with, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself personally? That might help us both know a little of who you are and what made you decide to be a socialist. Describe one core element of socialism that really resonates with you. And we'll start off with Tom.
Yeah, so I'm Tom. I'm a English teacher originally from New York, but I've lived in a few places, the UK, China, and now Germany. Why I became a socialist, I came from a family with long connections to the Irish Republican movement. Was raised on rebel songs, was exposed to that early. Also was exposed early to liberation theology and Catholic social teaching that pushed me towards socialism. And then in high school, I discovered Marx and was basically convinced that the Marxist analysis is correct, and with some variation and a lot of learning, I've been convinced of that since. What is core to me about socialism, especially now, is the conviction that the masses have the right and the capacity to be the masters of their own existence, that they don't need kings or bosses or unelected public health technocrats to tell them how to live. And I believe that the masses can be successful, will defeat this current ruling class assault. I think Mao said, make trouble again, fail again, make trouble, fail again. That's the logic of the imperialist and the reactionaries until they're doomed. Fight, fail, fight again, fail again, fight. That's the logic of the people until their victory. I believe this is true. This is why I became involved in the Freie Linke here in Germany, which is an attempt to bring together broad strata of any leftist opposed to lockdown measures. I believe other socialists will come to us sooner or later, and I believe the masses can win.
So how about David? How about you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm David Fletcher. I was born in the south of England, and I didn't have a very political childhood, I guess, unlike Tom. But really, it was when I went to university and discovered the Socialist Student Society there that I was kind of first exposed really to socialist ideas. And at that point, I'd been working part-time for several years in retail, in fast food, and the basic socialist ideas of workers owning the means of production, the, if you like, almost the redundancy of the capitalist class who don't play any role in the production process, I think really resonated with me. When I worked in McDonald's, the kitchen, it was like a production line. It was all about control and very strict timings. And so, when I was reading Marx's Capital for the first time, to be honest, I didn't really understand half of it, but the bits that I did understand did resonate with me, because it was so clear where, the role that workers' exploitation plays in the extraction of value and profits. So I think for me, the fundamental point of socialism is workers' control. It's not about being told what to do by the capitalist class. It's not about it's about people having control over their own workplace and ultimately scaling that up to their own society as a whole. Through the Socialist Student Society, which was essentially a front, to be honest, for the Socialist Party of England and Wales, which is part of the Committee for Workers International. So I joined them. I was quite active with that party for a while. Was involved in a factional fight with people like Bruce Wallace, and then eventually we kind of formed our own grouping. Then fast forward to 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party, and we kind of got stuck in the Labour Party. And after Keir Starmer was elected leader, kind of stopped getting involved in the Labour Party and was really, decided to set up Left Lockdown Sceptics, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later.
I'm AJ in San Francisco. I'm a teacher, high school teacher, and revolutionary socialist here. I think for me, when I was growing up, there were a few events that sort of led me to kind of try to figure out what was going on with the world. Abortion rights kind of came under attack in a way for the first time since Roe versus Wade, in a serious way. The first protest I ever went to was when I was like 12 or 13 in Washington, D.C. to defend Roe versus Wade. The uprising after Rodney King was beaten by police in LA, and the verdict of in that case. And then I also think the first Gulf War. I just had a lot of questions about racism, about sexism, about the way the world worked, about the cycles of poverty in my own family. And I found that I read the Communist Manifesto, and then when I went to college, I found a group that was actually organizing around those ideas. I remember reading it and thinking, it was the explanatory power of Marxism. It was that this made sense of the world for me. And then I found a group of people that were using these ideas to try to change the world. And I was there. That was it for me. I was all in. I was with that group, the ISO, for years, many years, and left that group, but did not leave my revolutionary socialist politics. I think, for me, that Marx and materialism explains the world. And for me, revolution follows from there. There's no sort of half measure way to sort of vote a change into power or rely on somebody else to do it for us. I think today, what continues pushing me to organize and be curious about the world is my anger, my real anger, and deep sadness about this world, but also my love and my belief that we are many and they are few, that every single person in this world are my people. All the people in the working class are my people. And any other idea that tries to say that all the working class is not my people, despite your race, your gender, your nation, your language, your ethnicity, any other idea other than that is wrong, is anti-revolutionary, and takes us away from the future that I hope we could see.
Yeah, Okay. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Adam Baker. I'm from the Workers' League, where I guess started to be out in socialism about 25 years ago, when there was a conservative capitalist government elected at that time. And I just thought the best thing to do to fight that was to become a socialist. So I joined a socialist organization at that time and stuck with it for some years. But of course, the more you get into socialism, the more you realize that it's not just the mainstream parties; it's the whole system and the whole system of capitalism. And so you study more about history and about the Marxist critique of capitalism, and yeah, it just makes sense, I suppose. Some of us are kind of inherent socialists, I suppose, and I guess I was one of those. But I mean, one element of socialism that resonates with me is that I struggle with the idea that well, like the workers' control idea that that managers who may or may not have better knowledge than you have power over you and can boss you around and give you orders and give you directions. And and of course they use that for their ends, not for what should be done in the fairest way, of course. So I think socialism can put it into that. And yeah, I mean, with the lockdowns and socialism, I think the working class has not really yet begun to fight. It's I see so many examples. I mean, there's a start of a fight back there for sure, but really the capitalists they're banking so far on that there is not a fight back, and there isn't a huge one yet. But there's huge potential for a fight back, because when the working class enters that fight, there's a big possibility of winning. You don't always win, of course, but there's a big possibility of winning, because history is just it might be a cliche to say it, but history is on our side, and I think Marxism and socialist theory helps with that. So
so everyone here is an anti-lockdown socialist or an anti-COVID repression. The viewpoint is rare among socialists, especially in the U.S. How did you come to this perspective that focuses on the state implementation of repression rather than the spread of a deadly virus? Who wants to answer that first?
Oh, goodness. I think when schools were first closed and everything was locked down, for me at first, the focus was on this is an absolute disaster for the working class and for working people. And my focus at first was on, look, if you tell people they have to stay home, then we need to be demanding X, Y, and Z, like end of rents, like direct deliveries of food for free. Like, my focus was sort of on how are people going to survive if this is what you are telling people that they need to do. But I think, by summer, that was whatever that was, March. By summertime, my experience of having gone through the spring in so-called distance learning with my students and seeing the toll that it was taking on families and students, and also seeing how immediately anti-solidarity and alienating it was for the teachers, for us, the way we started to sort of pull apart and divide kind of instantly, started to raise some questions for me. And by summer, when Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were both murdered, and the protests that erupted around that, when I watched people so quickly accept curfews before things even sort of broke out, like in their cities, like here in the Bay Area. When I watched the fact that all these people went out and there was no spike in like in cases and bodies dropping everywhere because people had been out protesting, when that didn't happen, it really started to raise some questions for me about what was really going on and what was the motivation behind this very tight level of control of our movement and our association with each other. And that's where the question of just who's benefiting from this started to really be the thing that I was focusing on. I started doing my own, division of the number of cases versus number of dead in the San Francisco Chronicle every week. And it's like, what is going on? Like, this is not, so I'll just stop there. I think it was once I started seeing reality that I was experiencing at a very small level, along with these bigger stories not matching up with the picture I was seeing, I had to shift my focus.
David?
Yeah, so I guess for me, initially I supported the lockdown policy. I was under the impression that there was this kind of deadly virus that was going to come. 1%, 2%, 3% of people infected were going to die. So obviously, with that mindset, I thought, well, these measures are justified. People can work from home. Those who can't work from home there are measures that can be put in place. The government really stepped up in terms of funding, like with the furlough scheme, where essentially they're paying 80% of people's wages. So I thought, okay, maybe this will be okay for a bit. And then, like AJ was saying, it got to the summer when cases were low, and people were warning, oh no, there's going to be another spike if people go out, but that never happened. And I thought, oh, hang on, what's going on here? And I started to look into it more. I was reading literature about the lockdowns, so there were scientific papers coming out showing that actually lockdowns, when reviewed across the world, didn't have any effect. They didn't impact COVID mortality when looked at across the various countries around the world. Why did and then I was looking around, seeing more unemployment. I could see the toll it was taking on my own children, just on myself, trying to work full time. I've got 3 kids at home, and I thought, well, this isn't kind of working out, is it? And then I was hearing about mental health issues with people who work in the council, local council, having to deal with suicides. And I thought, this really isn't justified. The average age of a COVID death was 80. I think it was 82 at the time. I thought, well, this is clearly an end of life disease. It's not really a deadly pandemic. And I think the way this has been framed, or the way it was framed initially, was completely wrong. And then you start thinking, well, why are they doing this? And well, I guess we can talk more about that later. But it's not for our benefit. That's for sure.
And Adam?
Well, I think I can admit that I was confused for probably the first few weeks of the say March, and at the start of April. I admit I was confused about what was happening, but the changer came from me when our union officials very early on in April cancelled Labor Day. Now, Labor Day, the Labor Day march that we had, local one we have here, it's been going for something like 150 years. And so as the moment the union officials and the union bureaucracy cancelled Labor Day, that was the moment which made me think, hang on a sec, something's not right here. And then so reading more about it, and then came the realization, well, the union bureaucracy and is helping the government to keep workers apart, so they can't resist this. They can't organize against it. That seems to be the driving factor. And then, of course, later, reading more about it, and then trying to marry that up with a Marxist analysis, where at what time can we say that the bourgeois state or the capitalist state is primarily concerned with healthcare of the working class and the poor? That's given the fact that we've had arguably 40 years of Western capitalist governments reducing funding drastically for healthcare, just ripping funds out of healthcare and education and all kinds of services, but especially healthcare. So it cannot possibly be that the bourgeois state today is concerned about healthcare. And of course as we probably agree, the lockdowns and face masks and even the vaccines are probably the worst thing for the healthcare of the working class. And so it's from our point of view, it's much more about political repression and economic motives for the ruling class, and where they need to keep the working class very severely repressed, and it's easy to do that with an ideology rather than brute force or using the state to spread itself out to use brute force. And unfortunately, they've chosen a quite effective ideology to do that. But luckily, there is a fight back against that as a minority, but a very important minority, fighting back against that.
I think I was disposed to be pretty skeptical very early on. I think in big part because of Cory Morningstar's work on the Green New Deal, and the whole NGO complex that I was already aware of before this, that the ruling class had been already moving into place to implement a really dramatic restructuring of our societies, one that we were not going to have a stake in, and that a lot that was being constructed there as a fraudulent response to the genuine ecological crisis was shifted immediately into place with minor changes of window dressings for this fraudulent response to a fraudulent crisis. So I was skeptical there. I'd also say Jacob Levich's longstanding research on the Bill and Melinda Gates organization, and I already had a sense of just how sinister an operation that already was, and that he had been long pushing for this public health imperialism, really militarizing public health as a way of plundering third world states and dominating them. Also Molly Klein's research and kind of exposure of the fake left, of Justice Democrats, how these kind of pseudo left-wing responses interpose themselves between us and a genuine Marxist analysis of the crisis. Those were really important for me to kind of be. I was skeptical from the beginning. I was not sure if maybe this was a bioweapon or, I was open from the get-go to all sorts of accounts. I knew that the mainstream media account was clearly contradictory from the very beginning. And then also just personally being in Germany and experiencing particularly the rift between knowing what was going on in other places, because I think one of the ironies of this crisis is that even though we've all been holed up in our rooms, and in a sense more international than ever before, and that your physical location seems less significant, I've never found people more parochial, more limited in their understanding of what's actually going on in the world. So I had the very surreal experience of being in Germany, where the lockdown was later than New York, was far more milder than New York, and started easing up far earlier than New York. And I would speak to friends and family, and they would say, well, you guys in Germany are doing so well because you locked down hard and early. And I said, whatever the explanation for the different experiences we've had of this crisis, that cannot be it. And these glaring contradictions that have been papered over through constantly, I think a lot of people, once you've kind of gone down the black hole of skepticism about these lockdowns, there's so much concrete information of clear skullduggery on the part of the media and the ruling class that it can't be explained. To explain that away would require a far more baroque conspiracy than any of the conspiracy theories that we are charged with having, which is just a conventional class analysis, actually, I think.
So each of our guests here is from a different or in a different location. Can you talk about the scale and character of the resistance to lockdowns in your locale? What has happened that you believe has been significant in terms of that resistance or response? And have you played, what role have you participated in it in any way? So we'll start with David.
Sure. So, I mean, resistance to lockdown last year was pretty negligible, I would say, because in part mainly because of the complete collapse of the left on this issue. So resistance to it has been very kind of underground and disparate, and a lot of it's been kind of organized in a not very organized way, kind of through Telegram groups and just trying to spread word of mouth. So, we've kind of seen things like people putting stickers on lampposts. We've had flash mob kind of groups where people might get together for like a song and dance in the street, which will eventually get called off by the police. People even organizing maskless shopping trips because people are frightened to go to the shops on their own, not wearing a mask, because there's so much social pressure to kind of participate in this charade, but starting last summer, there was a kind of a protest in London. There were a series of small protests around London, although those were kind of, because they were small, they were easily written off as kind of, a few quacks and conspiracy theorists and David Icke followers and so on. I think what's really changed this year over the last few months is that the demonstrations in London, Unite for Freedom marches, have been in the hundreds of thousands, and particularly the one that was recently, a couple of weeks ago, must have been 500,000 people out on the streets of London, and that's not an exaggeration. But the thing is, it didn't get any coverage whatsoever from the BBC. It was basically ignored by the mainstream media, and when it was brought up, it was, it's a few thousand anti-vaxxers. When I was there, Oxford Street was just packed end to end. It was huge. But because there's no major organizations behind it, it lacks, obviously, organization. It lacks kind of structure. So it kind of feels almost like an insurgency in a way, but it's not controlled. And I think what there really needs to be is some sort of organizing body or some sort of coalition that can unite all these different disparate groups, people with very different politics, but on this issue of the day, fundamentally agree. I mean, my participation in this, my main contribution has been setting up the Left Lockdown Sceptics website. And I guess you could describe me as a reluctant leader. So I didn't see anybody on the left in the UK kind of doing this. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to do it, aren't I? So I kind of rallied people around me who were thinking along similar lines. And we had some chats. And then on that basis, I was able to draft up the first document that we put on the website, which is kind of our analysis of COVID fascism. So I'd say, and really the website's gone from there. So I'd say that's my main contribution to this, as well as obviously attending the big London demos.
Adam, next.
Well, I mean, I can say that, and not specifically where I live in Australia, but in Melbourne and Victoria, arguably had the harshest lockdowns in the world, where I think they had 2 3-month lockdowns. So basically they had 6 months of lockdown of, I think they were tier 4 or stage 4 lockdowns, where you literally could get arrested for leaving your house without a reason. and this went on for 3 months at a time, so and 6 months in total. So they were arguably the harshest lockdowns in the world. Well, in the country next door in New Zealand as well, they had extremely harsh lockdowns. I heard from in some instances they had police parked at the end of residential streets checking that people were not coming out of their houses. And so this was just extreme. Where I live in Australia, in Queensland, they weren't as bad, but certainly the propaganda level, the propaganda barrage of COVID is as bad as anywhere else. But despite that, there has been quite a bit of an anti-lockdown movement throughout last year and continuing this year, which has sporadically organized quite large demonstrations against the lockdowns, and in at least all of the major cities, and probably the largest ones came about. Well, at the time where the vaccine rollout was beginning, and so that really, I think, garnered a whole lot more people into these anti-lockdown rallies than were coming before, because I think there's even sections of workers that are in favor of lockdowns or that are in favor of the face mask. They don't have a problem with them. A large number of them don't want to take this experimental vaccine, and with all of the obvious side effects, including death, and especially not as a mandatory thing. So that really the vaccine, or the mandatory vaccine sort of element, really pumped up the anti-lockdown movement to a large extent. Yeah, I mean, following on from David, there is a bit of a lack of political leadership of that anti-lockdown movement. While they're good organizationally, and they can organize these rallies, which are very impressive, there is a lack of political direction and perspective, which if the socialist component of that was large enough, it could probably exert some influence. But unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. But also, like in the UK, the mainstream media, the corporate media, is almost totally ignoring these anti-lockdown demonstrations and rallies and pickets, almost totally. Not totally, but almost totally. So, large numbers of the working class would not know that there are large numbers of people, in some cases thousands of people, marching in the streets in their cities against the lockdowns and the mandatory face masks and the mandatory vaccines. But anyway, it's the hope that can be maintained and gain some more political direction, hopefully in a pro-working class direction, can come about.
Okay, thanks. AJ?
I thought it was Tom.
Oh, gosh. Thank you, Eduardo. Tom.
I'm only following your...
Yeah, Tom, I'm really coming after you, trying to get you out of this thing.
Being censored.
How do you feel about censorship on what's left?
So in Germany, like I said, even though the initial lockdown was very mild and had a lot of popular support, massive consensus, Germany was doing right, it was fitting its national stereotype. I think early on there was more healthy skepticism in German language media that I came across than in English. Lots of Telegram groups and websites, and even seemed quite a few prominent doctors, Sutre Bhakti, Wolfgang Wodarg. Also early on in Germany, a a group called Querdenker, associated, it means lateral thinker in German, associated with a German IT businessman, Michael Ballweg, quickly developed a fairly hegemonic role in the protest movement on this quite franchise model. So each city would be Querdenker and then its postal code. So whatever, Querdenker 30 for Berlin. And this quickly established a network. There's obviously lots of skepticism about how much of this was perhaps controlled opposition, but also Germany has this quite substantial middle class, real independent middle class that was assaulted here through these lockdowns, and maybe had a little bit more self-confidence than middle classes in places like UK or the US. And so this movement was dominated often by these Querdenker groups. They started growing particularly after the summer. Immediately in the media, they were universally defamed as far right, often lots of attempts to tar it as neo-Nazi or AfD, which is the major right-wing party in Germany, even though the AfD wasn't playing a very significant part in them. And I have to say, personally, even I was quite conflicted. So I went to a few of these protests early in the fall, and I didn't find any of these far-right people that were supposed to be there, but I also am not that fluent in German. So I would go back and I would say, was I just at some far-right rally, had a real kind of trepidation. And an element in Germany that seems to be fairly unique is that Antifa groups have taken as basically honest and legitimate this bourgeois media consensus that all of the rallies are fascist, or the ones who aren't fascist are nutcases. And so Antifa often attempts to counterpress and hinder, so stop marches, directly try to counteract or stop the anti-lockdown rallies in Germany, which is a really complicated factor. It's really unfortunate. Of course, I think there's probably state actors driving this, but also a lot of people who are genuinely confused, who have been taken in by the propaganda, whose analysis cannot really integrate the fact, who can't really honestly look at these protests and see the class composition of these protests and the political composition, which is not right-wing. That's really clear. Then after the winter, moving into the spring, this movement's been growing again. There was a demo that tried to distance itself from Querdenker a bit, as Reich, that was quite large in all of the capitals in Germany. And then there was a major demonstration in Kassel with some 20,000 people, which was really phenomenal. We went and were pushed off onto a square, and we hadn't even gotten a full sense of the size of the rally. And then it moved into a march. And this I had just gone on personally. And as the march formed, we looked back and just saw this sea of people going forward and forward. I had not appreciated the scale beforehand. Was also struck by, the flags were peace flags, rainbow flags, totally, clearly non-right wing, but ceaselessly in the media still, that's the message. And I'm happy to say that on May Day, the Freie Linke, along with a group called the Berliner Kommunarden, and also a group called Freedom Parade, that are sort of German club culture, party people, but got together for an explicitly left-wing anti-lockdown demonstration and march. And the demo started with some 200 people with some fantastic speeches and culminated in a march that got up to 500 people at some point, marching through a working class neighborhood of Berlin, carrying red flags of the Freie Linke, and making clear that there is a left that's opposing these lockdowns.
Thank you. And we're going to save the most inspiring for last with the United States.
We have nothing like that here. It's the end. In fact, our May Day march in San Francisco was a look back to the glory years of the 1934 general strike, like seemingly absent of any content about the horrible attack that the working class is under right now. I mean, Kenny can probably add on, but I mean, we have nothing at all like that. I can say the only thing that I think is significant have been the moments where, for example, the demonstrations against police murders and the police became, this is something that the weight of it was enough to say, we're going to defy orders to be in our houses. We're going to go out and protest. Those were moments where people could see that there are other things that are dangerous in the world and that COVID is not our big dangerous boogeyman. I would say, especially here in the Bay Area, after we were sort of re-locked down in November and December, it has been dismal, except for the sort of flashpoint around school reopening, which, neither of those things were explicitly anti-lockdown, but were moments of people sort of questioning the constraints on our movement and association and right to protest and be together and have an education that exists in real life.
Yeah, just from jumping off what AJ said, there's very little going on in the Bay Area when it comes to resistance. And in fact, I think that that second lockdown kind of cemented this acceptance of the narrative, because even during the George Floyd protests, a lot of friends would go out, protest, stay out, defy the lockdowns, but then they would quarantine for 14 days. They themselves would submit to that. And so people, I felt, were beginning to question stuff. In the organizing circles that I'm part of here, we launched a bunch of organizations to do mutual aid, to especially working class people, mainly immigrant families that are really in single mothers that are getting, a very shitty deal. And so, but again, what has happened is that people have fully accepted the narrative, and there is no questioning the scientific experts, the official, media. And if you do, I feel like this is where Trump was useful for in the US, that if you question science, even though it's pseudoscience, it's not even, a lot of the facts are really manipulated, and people, again, don't have the confidence to question experts and bring into question their statistics, their constant, changing of what COVID does and what it, how severe it is. Again, the reality is that there's little to no resistance, and I only find people in remote areas that have similar ideas about this, and so yeah, even now it's hard to speak about it. At my workplace, there's only one other person that hasn't gotten the vaccine, and that is my brother, and out of 20 people, and so and then we constantly get jokes about being right wing, just like Tom was saying, fascist and all this stuff, and so it's sad is we're not at all at a point where we can organize from that standpoint. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the proliferation of vaccines and the implementation of vaccine passports? And should we start with
Adam?
I think this it probably, if it gets set up and implemented, we're talking of a situation of a type of vaccine apartheid, where it's possibly getting to a situation where those who either I can't get the vaccine for medical reasons, such as pregnant women or those with allergies or etc., or those who refuse to take the vaccine, may be excluded from society, or maybe excluded from public participation in society. It may start with overseas travel, but could very easily be extended to domestically, to public transport, to even cinemas, theaters, shopping centers. So you may not be able to go to your shopping center to get groceries, your food, without a vaccine passport, and so we could be setting up Bantustan's effectively, or sheltered communities set apart from society. There is the danger of this, and at the moment, in Australia, there's a lot of check-in apps which for not for the vaccine itself, but for tracking and tracing, and so that could very easily could start to be used for excluding people from public transport, or events, or sport, or cultural events, and so on and so forth. This is dangerous. I mean, not to speak of the reason that the COVID vax, of course, doesn't prevent infection or transmission of the virus, assuming that the virus exists at all. So it's a question of how could it be implemented? But again, this is a totalitarian measure, and certainly the Workers' League, we do label it as fascism. This is a form of fascism that is being implemented here, and it may not be led by a Nazi party, perhaps, and it may even be led by liberal parties of the establishment, but this is a form of fascism as far as we're concerned, and this is why it has to be fought. But I think it can be fought, because I don't think a majority of the people, because of the major problems, in blood clots is just one of the problems, but I think it's a minority of people that are volunteering to get the COVID vaccine at the moment. So that's a hopeful sign as far as I'm concerned.
And Tom?
Yeah, to me, the rollout of these vaccines and the whole narrative around them is absolutely grotesque. I think Suchrit Bhakti, microbiologist from here in Germany, made the very eloquent point that for the vast majority of the population, the risk profile of this disease is so low that it would almost be virtually impossible to design a study large enough to detect a net positive from a vaccine for this disease, vis-a-vis unknown, unquantified risks, or even the real concrete risks that are already manifesting themselves, never mind what this dangerous experimental technology can do in the future. And for the population that is at risk, which is still, there's a large question about how much of this is an impression created by the Senecide events imposed by lockdown and the media hysteria. A lot of that is undetermined, but even so, that's a population which vaccines are not almost ever made for, because their risk profile is so broad that identifying a benefit is so difficult. But what's grotesque to me more than anything is the first world chauvinism of our comrades, like Adam said, this essentially being at most complicit in constructing this world of Bantustans, where these, whether it's first world states or corporations, are given the right to dominate, to impose internal borders across our society, which will entrench and exacerbate existing inequalities. And the thing that's so striking to me is if you believed even the mainstream account of this disease, even then, to me, you would have to be a barbarian to accept this vaccine under the age of 50 before it was spread to at-risk populations in the third world. So the fact that our comrades are willingly accepting this privileged position and not saying, especially if you think, oh, the capitalists hate lockdown, They want to end it. They're engaged in all these conspiracies to spread disinformation because they desperately want to get back to production. Well, then here's your big revolutionary move. Refuse the vaccine for the healthy people who don't need it by the mainstream account of this before the at-risk profile. But they're not doing it because so much of this is actually rationalization for this first world chauvinism, which we have to oppose root and branch. And I think it's important to reveal that even if, again, the whole account was true, the risk to the demographics of the third world, given their age, and what we've seen of the pathogen, which no honest person can really think has been stopped by lockdowns from spreading in the third world. What you're really demanding is, because of your first world hypochondria, that the third world is going to dedicate huge portions of their thin public health budgets to a vaccine which is not a net need for them. Right? This is this first world chauvinistic demand that undergirds so much of this vaccine passport discourse. Even if the pathogen was as deadly as they say, and the vaccines were perfect, it would still be perverse to impose this demand on the third world, which could save billions of more lives with those resources. So,
I agree with that. I will just add that lining up to get the vaccine has been very, very popular and enthusiastically embraced by everyone. Everyone here that I know, everyone around me, it is a really kind of disgusting new world where everybody I run into asks me whether or not I've been vaccinated, friends, loved ones, strangers. It's just disgusting and creepy. And I actually feel like we've reached this point now where the story is like about how, the United States has hit this point where everybody who was willing and excited to get vaccinated has done so. And we're now starting to run into the resistors, and the stories in the media are about that. And I actually feel like they're very well poised to break through that next layer of people once they start saying, you can't come to this basketball game, you can't get on that airplane, X, Y, or Z. I already hear that amongst people around me who have not yet been vaccinated. When that happens, that's going to be the tipping point. So I think they're going to be pretty successful in getting a whole bunch of bodies into their scary story experiment. And I think also that, I agree with everything that Tom just said. And I would just say, just to take one example, if in San Francisco, 2 times the number of people died from drug overdose last year as died from COVID, right? If you want to save people's lives, imagine if you took all of that money that was being spent on getting people into this vaccine test and into this world of like apps and vaccine apartheid, and spent one fraction of that on, housing, drug treatment, clean injection sites, any of the things that could address the number of really atrocious and unnecessary overdose deaths that happened last year in our city.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I agree with all the previous speakers, but I think the one almost mistake that's being made is to refer to these as vaccines. They're not vaccines. They do not contain inactivated virus. So, if you have a flu jab, it contains inactivated influenza A or B. What happens is your immune system detects the viral material. You develop an immune response to that holistic virus. These injections are RNA-based or mRNA. So these are instructions to instruct your cells to produce part of this so-called virus, assuming it exists, which is the spike protein. And we were told, oh, well, this spike protein, it's benign, right? So it's okay for your body to produce it. It's perfectly safe. So your body is given the genetic instructions to produce the spike protein in your own cells. Somewhere in your body, could be anywhere, could be in it could be in your brain for all you know. And then your immune system develops an immune response to that spike protein. Now, the problem is all previous attempts to develop an actual vaccine for any coronavirus has always failed. They've always failed on the animal trials because it has always led to what is called antibody-dependent enhancement, which is basically where the subjects will develop initially a strong immune response, but then months down the line, if they're later re-exposed to the virus, their body, their immune system will overreact, and this process, what's called a cytokine storm, happens, where basically your body ends up almost attacking itself, and this has led to deaths and illness, severe illness, disease enhancement. And I think this is actually what's going to happen this winter. I think these so-called, these injections are actually going to make more people ill or worse this winter. And I think Tom has previously alluded to some of the actors behind this, people like Bill Gates, who have a clear eugenics agenda, right? A depopulation agenda. And, even people sympathetic to opposing lockdowns might not agree with me on this, but I do think that these injections are designed to cause illness and death, right? And I think they're going to monetize this by selling people the medical solutions and the drugs to treat what these very injections have actually caused to people. And of course, sick people are a lot easier to control if you're reliant on hospitals and drugs for your own existence. You're a lot easier to control, and that's what the vaccine passport is. It's another way of controlling people. It's treating us like cattle. Lockdowns are being used to break people down, to atomize us. I mean, this, like Adam said, this is fascism, right? This is really absolutely terrible, and they're going to start to roll out these injections on children after the summer. I mean, I just can't believe it, to be honest with you. And yet, according to the official UK government stats, 2/3 of adults have had their first jab. So, I mean, who knows what this winter is going to be looking like? I'm very concerned.
I just wanted to add to what David said, that we've discussed this topic a lot in our show, and at least from my perspective, it's not just about the vaccine. Yes, that's one aspect of it, but it is about creating this technofascist world. Implementing technologies, surveillance tech, registries, borders, really, like some of you mentioned, within internal national borders, segregating, creating this apartheid state that's already kind of in place. I've gone to baseball games here when we reopen, and you have a vaccinated section and a non-vaccinated section, and so that what that does is puts pressure on people. I know plenty of people that work in the medical field that have the reservations, but they fall into peer pressure. So it's not even, the imposition itself from the state. It is the social pressure that the state has created, essentially, because everyone has accepted this, propaganda, the constant bombardment with the propaganda. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think that vaccines play a role, and they're an element in what's happening. And we've discussed in the past that, you can't understand this if you don't pan out and look at the competition among states, and why every, imperial state, China, the US, Russia, Europe, everyone has a stake in pushing this narrative. And then you have the colonies in the South that, what are you going to do if you don't have this tech? Even Cuba is in the game, because they know that if they're not in the game of, controlling biotech and artificial intelligence, then, you're going to be a colony and fall behind. So again, it is the vaccines, for me, it's an element of the major what's happening, at a macro level, and which is really the restructuring of capitalism, in my mind. And we refer to what's happened here as a control collapse of the economy, in the US, because when you really look at the money, where the billionaires have doubled their wealth during the pandemic, and that is kind of a very basic evidence of that. Not the capitalist class didn't lose. Some of them, they sacrificed some industries, maybe like travel, but look at what industries are really, really growing.
Can I just say quickly around this? Oh, Tom, I do want to hear you, but one thing I just want to say, I'm very disheartened by what's going on, but I'm also encouraged in some ways. I don't know how this will happen in the northern countries, but in Mexico, where I'm from, because there are entire communities that are rejecting people from coming in to inject communities because of the government. So they reject, and I don't know how that's going to, I just don't see that happening in the USA or in Britain or any other first world country, you know? So I just think it's interesting, those contrasts. Tom, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I share David's skepticism, even if I don't know what the mechanism will be. I've been struck by specifically our comrades on the left, and particularly even on the Marxist left, that there's been this idealized pseudo-analysis that says capitalism seeks to exploit workers. It was the same analysis that said, so they don't want lockdown, right? And they said, so why would they want to make workers ill when they could exploit them? And this is this overly abstract, of course, concrete capitalists that were dominating the British Empire fought the Opium Wars, right? That made Chinese workers very ill and unproductive, because for those concrete capitalists in that conjuncture, it was a more efficient way for them to suck the accumulated value out of the Chinese empire and to also undermine it. Just like the CIA was happy to funnel drugs into ghettos in America and suck money out of those communities and undermine them. And we're dealing with a capitalist class, the dominant factors of which are not involved in the production of commodities, consumer goods that people want. They're involved in, creating these addictive opioids and tech products and forcing them through monopoly and force. So this, but this is what a capitalist does, has been a real point of confusion for our comrades.
Yeah, so most socialists in the world support versions of lockdown, vaccination programs, contact tracing, and even censorship. In your opinion, why has the Marxist revolutionary left gotten this moment so wrong?
I think there's a lot of reasons. There's a couple that I think I want to highlight. First I will say, like I was earlier when I was talking about sort of my initial action when the first lockdowns happened. Like back then in last March and April, at a certain level, I understand the focus, which was the focus of most of what would be called the radical left here, of, we can't expect capitalists to take care of us or have our safety at interest, so we can't go back to work, because if we go back to work, they're just all okay with having us all get sick and die, which I think has continued to be the predominant argument of what is still maybe a visible left here in the Bay Area. Concerns about workers being back at work without adequate protective gear, or being asked to lie about how they got infected with COVID, and things like that. I understood that a year ago, like I said, but I feel like that is the place where the left in the Bay Area and in the United States has been trapped and has not been able to get itself out from under. Partly, I think, there's been a complete and utter collapse. So I don't even know what we mean when we talk about like the Marxist or revolutionary left in the United States anymore. I don't even know that makes sense as a grouping. I don't know that it exists. Part of the problem, I think, is that, at least in my experience, we have been so obsessed with chasing a correct line and having a correct line to lead the working class, to fall behind our correct line, that, like the left more broadly, the space for debate has been utterly shut down and closed. And this is a fundamental restructuring of the way that work is being done in the world right now. And the fact that we have this habit and practice on the revolutionary left and the left more broadly of, you need to quickly get in line with what the correct stance is and the correct position to have, has meant that I don't think we've had the space or the ability or the habit or practice of really debating what the hell is going on with each other. And that has been a really, really big problem here, particularly in the United States. Just, the stranglehold of the Democratic and Republican Party official politics everything is separated into red and blue. Every debate gets narrowed down to what color the city or the state or the union that you're in, belongs to. And it has an extremely, I think the effect that that's had on the revolutionary left, it's been an extreme focus on finding the, maybe some people that you can sort of peel off from that still within the structure of the Democratic Party. And so, if you had people who called themselves revolutionaries supporting a candidate running for the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, it's just been a long, slow path of degradation, which has left us in a position, I think, just utterly unorganized and unable to debate the humongous changes that are happening around us.
David?
I think it's, like AJ said, there are so many issues, but my kind of take on it, one of the main issues, I think, with the so-called Marxist left, is that the organizations are structured essentially like cults. Okay, they do not, in my experience, they do not allow internal debate. They do not encourage freedom of thinking. Often it's they have one intellectual, a few intellectuals who come up with the ideas, and these are just filtered down to the membership, and this is what you're doing today, sell these newspapers or whatever, and at the very beginning I alluded to the fact that I was involved in a faction fight within the Socialist Party, and it was really shocking seeing comrades who I'd known for years just suddenly turn on me because I'd raised disagreements with the leadership. And I think that was almost a kind of a microcosm of what we've seen now with this COVID stuff, with the vaccines, and anybody who raises any criticisms must be a conspiracy theorist and a nutter. I've lost so many comrades and friends, even members of my own family don't even want to really talk to me, and it's I think it's because the Marxist organizations, they're structured like cults. And what's happening now is essentially a big psychological operation from the state. So in the UK, we have a group called SAGE, which is the scientists advising the government. And a third of them are behavioral psychologists, behavioral nudge, they call them nudge people, basically trying to very subtly and almost insidiously influence people's behavior. And they've got someone, Susan Mishi, who's a member of the Communist Party, and she's a millionaire, and she's involved in this, but this is classic kind of Stalinism in a way, because I think that the way the far left see a socialist society being constructed is like a giant psychological operation, that you will mold people from the top down. You will mold people, to become, ideal socialist workers from the top down, like a psychological operation. And you compare that to, say, Che Guevara, who had more of a humanist approach, who said, look, we have to demonstrate, the virtues of socialism in action, right? So he would go out and do additional work, and you demonstrate the idea in practice, which previously I would have written off as idealism, right? But I think that this is the only way to do it, because you cannot force people. Like, socialism cannot be built by forcing people or brainwashing people. And I think the reason why basically the Marxist left have bought into all this is because they want to do this. It's just that they've been beaten to it by the bourgeoisie, right? And I think deep down, that's why they identify more with this COVID fascism than humanity, frankly.
Tom.
Yeah, so I think the diagnosis of the kind of structural disarray of a lot of the Marxist left is basically accurate, although I see it more as a consequence of the global division of labor, and the fact that a lot of the left in the West orientates itself towards the labor aristocracy, or has an insufficient analysis of the labor aristocracy, of the real class composition of their national states, and are not sufficiently oriented towards the global working class, which is super exploited to produce the privileges which generate the first world chauvinism of significant portions of the working class in Western states, which makes them orientate themselves towards the state. And this means in practice that a lot of the Marxist leftist parties orient themselves to this class, and then not very successfully, because that class is not interested yet, so long as it has that privileged position in Marxism, or to the petty bourgeoisie and to intellectuals. And this, on the other hand, leads in particular, I think, to an acceptance of petty bourgeois thought boundaries. Particularly, for me, a very important model for what we're living through is 9/11. And one of the things that struck me, and when I was constantly doubting myself and saying, how could I have this analysis and all of these parties and sources that I hitherto trusted or had some faith in be so wrong about it? And I did reflect on the fact that I don't know a single major Western communist party that has any meaningful analysis of 9/11. And as soon in left-wing spaces as you try to broach this topic, some Jacobin reader will tell you that you're about to alienate the working class and we can't touch on these things. When actually the majority of Americans, for instance, don't believe the government's line on 9/11. And if you're aware of how disproportionately middle-class people are scandalized by any questions about 9/11, you can easily deduce, even without the numbers, that most of the working class, as anyone with experience in working class jobs knows, do not believe the government, are not afraid of conspiracy theories. So this whole analysis that to me is rooted in class is where I think part of the problem has come from. Also, I think 9/11 is such an important model in that we had this clear ruling class operation that was coordinated along with this perfect fake left response that flattered every leftist line, right? This was blowback. This is the consequence. This is, the result of America's imperialism and the people standing up. And it seemed to flatter all of these left-wing lines, even though implicitly that whole conception was loaded with, again, racist conceptions about Arabs and Muslims that leftists found themselves uncritically pushing through. But it was so perfect, and it was offered, and it flattered all of these positions that it was well mobilized, because it was strategically well operated by the ruling class. Although we'll just say I don't see how Stalinism has anything to do with what Susan Michie does, or is a useful term for understanding her or her compatriots.
Thanks, Tom. Eduardo had to leave because he doesn't like 9/11 conspiracies. I'm kidding. That's a complete joke. I'm sorry, Eduardo. All right.
You're alluding to a previous episode where I wouldn't concede with you on 9/11.
Adam, and then Kenny, if you want to come in.
I think the Marxist left is divided into, and I'm going to use these labels here, and I would stress that I'm not using these labels necessarily as pejorative labels, but the Marxist left is divided into roughly the Stalinist and Maoist side and the Trotskyist side. And in my view, the role of Stalinists and Maoists, whether they're in what we refer to as the deformed worker states, or whether they're in the Western capitalist states, or in the third world states, effectively the job of a Stalinist or Maoist party or organization is to get the workers to support the government in some form, or to get the workers to try and push for some reforms from the government. It wasn't really a surprise, so much of a surprise to me that the Stalinist and Maoist parties would support the government on something like COVID, because they kind of do that most of the time anyway. Even though this COVID is so much more than what ordinarily happens, it's so much more than expecting a reform from the government. But I think that's being repeated for the Stalinist and Maoist parties in that case. With regards to the Trotskyist left, although those who identify as Trotskyist or claim to be Trotskyist, they have at least nominally more of a sense that the governments or capitalist governments are not our governments, that they're not the governments of the working class, and that workers need to form their own government, their own state, and so on and so forth. They have more of a sense of that. But what has, in my view, prevented them from putting that perspective into practice is their conception of science. In that they seem to have this idea that bourgeois science or capitalist science cannot be corrupted, whereas all other aspects of capitalist society can be distorted and can be corrupted by the process of capitalism. But they seem to imagine that science and healthcare and things related to that, and vaccine development and things like that can't be corrupted by big pharma or by the corporations, which is an extraordinary position to have. But they seem to have that. And so they take on all of the bourgeois science to do with COVID, with all of its distortions and all of its fake science in a lot of ways. So that I think that is what prevents a lot of the Trotskyist or self-claimed Trotskyist organizations from seeing. And it's so both of them have difficulty seeing, or they can't see, or they don't want to see that the actual class line is COVID. COVID is the class line for the working class at the moment. The moment you take on any of the COVID ideology on board, or any of these Marxist parties, self-claimed Marxist parties, take on any aspect of the COVID ideology, you're using the ideology of the ruling class that they're using against the working class. So, you really have to reject it all. All of the COVID ideology has to be rejected. But unfortunately, a lot of the Marxist left have a lot of difficulty doing that. But I just want to mention that one of them, the Spartacus League, has just recently, only 12 months after the fact, they've just recently come out with an anti-lockdown position, but it's very partial. They're only opposed to lockdowns. They're not opposed to vaccines, not opposed to face masks or tracking and tracing or anything else. It's a very partial position, but it's perhaps a small crack, a very small crack in the what we refer to as the lockdown left. And so, we're trying to hopefully sort of exploit that and to drive more of a wedge into the Marxist left to try and bring them around at least.
And Kenny, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe just kind of summarizing, all of your points. I agree with AJ. Where is the Marxist left? At least for me, I've come to Marxism in the last 3 years, where it's really made sense. Before that, I was more of a liberal. But the point is that I've never been part of an organization, but I see in organizing what David has referred to as this top-down approach, and that to me is not socialism, and it will require democratizing knowledge, getting it out of academia, and Marxism. That is my mission, to kind of navigate Marxism with comrades here, people that are willing to understand and to have the courage to question themselves any leadership, even especially actually our own leadership, because that is the world that I envision. And so, yeah, I personally, because of my context, I don't see any real left at the moment. What I see is right wingers coming to be progressives, and so yeah, I mean, it's a long fight, I guess, and I think we're at the very building blocks again, starting from scratch. In the task is to again encourage other people to be empowered, to be wrong, to question, to disagree with any leadership, especially the bourgeois storylines in the media, and come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, I'm sort of changing the script as we go. Part of me thinks now that we should go to question 8, which is, what do y'all think the real agenda is driving this? And Kenny, I think it's fun. Is that okay? Can we go to that one?
Okay, so in your opinion, what is the real agenda driving the mainstream COVID narrative and the state repression? And as isolated as we are, what do you think we need to begin to do to fight it?
I mean, ultimately, I believe the real agenda is to dramatically depress the cost of labor power, that is wages, and to do that, the capitalist class need to unleash horrific levels of political repression, so that the workers are hampered in their fight back, or in fact even can't fight back. And I think that's what they have done. And before we were talking about a form of COVID as a form of fascism, or lockdowns as a form of fascism. What we find in a fascist situation is that it's not actually the state power, the capitalist state power, that is that is wielded against workers. Often it's like your workmates, your families, your colleagues, or your former colleagues, or your former comrades, or your former people that you work with, even your family, your people in your community. These are the people. It's that's immense peer pressure and social pressure that weighs down against you. That's actually how fascist political repression works. I mean, ultimately, the capitalist state will use brute force if it needs to, but it's those ones that you have to split from, who you've formerly very close to. What we need to do to fight it, very briefly. I think we do, without getting on to the next question, I think we do need to work with the forces that are opposing the lockdowns, the anti-lockdown movement, or those people that are opposing the lockdowns, even if they come from the right. And initially, I think this is our only option, and that doesn't mean that we should adapt our politics to the right at all. We should try and maintain or try and develop a left-wing perspective for that. But I don't think we have any choice. We have to work with those forces from the right that are opposing lockdowns in the name of liberty, or whatever their reasons are for doing that. Because I think that's an important starting point. So
Tom, you're next.
I think it's hard to maybe read the tea leaves about exactly what the ruling class is looking to do. But what was striking to me is particularly looking at that Johns Hopkins model, where they not long before this, I think at least many people in the anti-lockdown movement are aware that leading elites, public officials got together and war-gamed a coronavirus pandemic scenario, right? And they came up with this pamphlet that was published of these predictions for the world, and this has been used as like, oh well, conspiracy, and then it's been one of these useful techniques of kind of conspiring in plain sight so that the expose is therefore deflated. But what was more striking to me was in the actual press material that released, when they looked at these 4 different scenarios for the future after a serious pandemic. Every single scenario that these ruling class elites were predicting at some point 20, 30 years down the line started going towards massive social disruption or unrest, and that the ruling elites are just as aware as we are on the left of the intense contradictions in the system, of the ecological crisis, of the instability of this. I mean, socialism has become more popular than ever in many places. That's why the ruling class needs to co-opt it, right? Just like was the case in the 20th century. So they know, and they don't sit on their hands. I think the ruling class is aware of these manifest risks to themselves. And like Marx said in Capital, mankind makes their own history, but they don't do so in conditions of their own choosing. A point that my comrade Molly Klein often makes is that capitalists are not necessarily so fond of capitalism, right? There's a lot of things they don't like about capitalism, a lot of risk involved in the whole structure of this mode of production, that if they could get a more stable slave-like system, they're not like they have some ideological conviction that they're dedicated to the free market. And so we have to get rid of these, I think, illusions and appreciate the reality that this may be a truly ambitious ruling class assault like it seems to be, and that in the past the ruling class has looked for depopulation and mass enslavement, whatever it might be. It's not in our interest, and that's very clear. And so I think we have to be kind of concrete about that. As far as what we can do, I think unifying on the left is important. Even that's why maybe I'll refrain from engaging in any defense of my fellow Maoist and Stalinist in the interest of, like the Freie Linke here has made an effort to cast a broad net. All people with basic left-wing commitments who are opposed to these lockdowns, building up a structure of groups all throughout Germany. And again, I'm not representing the group here at all. I should make that clear. I'm just an individual member, and even not as alive to as much going on in it as fluent German speakers. But it's been a pretty effective structure so far of creating local groups with a huge emphasis on grassroots democracy. I know the NGOs have kind of almost made that concept seem compromised, but that's what we need: true, rigorous democracy at every level to actually create the movement we need. As far as working, who we work with, I think we have to be very clear and consistent about our principles. So I'm not interested necessarily in working with openly right-wing groups, but I think this whole contact guilt game of, this person was in this group, which was in this group, which was related to this person, is only going to be wielded against us, and is a game that the ruling class can always dominate in the media and in the spectacle, and that we have to avoid and build our movement towards an open orientation. Work with the movements that are there on the ground, which aren't explicitly right-wing almost anywhere, so far as I know, because anti-lockdownism is not intrinsically right-wing in any way. So there are right-wing people present, and that's not necessarily a problem. It's clear about our principles and our goal, which is to stop this ruling class offensive.
David?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what's happening is, you could call it the Great Reset, and Klaus Schwab, the chairman of the World Economic Forum, literally wrote the book COVID-19, the Great Reset. Okay, so the Great Reset is you could call that the ideology. That's their kind of playbook. In the same way that for Thatcher it was, neoliberalism or whatever. This is kind of their justification for what they're doing, right? I mean, the analogy with the 70s and the 80s in the UK, anyway, with Thatcher, was that the UK was facing, profitability crisis because of, I think, what Adam alluded to before, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and there was this kind of new technology coming in the 70s in the form of microprocessors, in terms of computerization technology, internet, cable, networking. But for that new technology to be fully realized, there had to be an economic crash to basically purge the unproductive capital out of society and allow the smaller companies that haven't invested so much capital, they can now capitalize on these new technologies, this new computer technology in this case, in the case of the 80s. And then obviously that led to society being kind of almost re-engineered on the basis of computers. And the 80s really led to a new wave of globalization. You didn't need to, it became a lot easier to outsource production because you can monitor companies abroad using your, computers and so on. Banking was internationalized a lot easier. And it completely re-engineered society. You no longer had near full employment. You had more computerization and jobs being replaced by computers, but at least then there was the chance to retrain in these new industries being created, like the computer industry. The problem is what's happening now in this so-called fourth industrial revolution is that there won't be enough jobs created, new jobs, to replace the ones that are being replaced by automation, being replaced by AI, being replaced by, you've seen, Andrew, in education, how that's going to be automated. It's health as well. And so they've got a massive surplus population, the ruling class. They've got a surplus population, at least in the West anyway, where our economy is oriented around finance and services and really is based on exploiting the so-called third world. We're surplus to requirements, a lot of us, and they're going to have to manage us in a way that we don't overthrow the system, and maybe they want to kill us. Maybe they want to kill large swathes of. I don't know. Like Tom said, we couldn't possibly think about what they actually plan to do. But this is all about social re-engineering and using these new technologies that have been on the horizon, but they need an economic crash, an economic recession to enable them to be employed in and basically lead to a new wave of profitability for capital. So just briefly on what can we do? Well, yes, we absolutely do have to hook up with the whole of the anti-lockdown movement, and that will include people on the right. But this is not an unprecedented kind of thing to do. So I know in the US, the Black Panthers kind of allied with these kind of redneck organizations to fight poverty and things like that, even though they had initial differences on race issues. But by working together, they actually overcame those. In the UK, we had a kind of a similar thing where in the 80s, where the miners were on strike, and gay and lesbian groups went to support them, and miners were kind of, coal miners, very traditional conservative men, very heterosexual, shall we say, and then you had these kind of, LGB groups supporting them, which was it's quite an unusual combination, but by working together and supporting them because they had a common enemy, the Thatcher government, it actually cemented trust. And I think that's kind of what we have to do. I mean, in the US, you're going to have a lot of Trump supporters, a lot of pro-gun and more religious people who are very into the Constitution and liberty. They're going to be your best allies, in the US, those people. In the UK, the situation is slightly different, but we absolutely do need to do things that we would have not otherwise considered before.
AJ?
Yeah, I think other folks have talked about this well from a sort of wide lens perspective. I will say I think this sort of restructuring of work and sort of massive addition of more bodies than are needed to do the work that is there. I think on the individual level, I first started to see this obviously with the teaching situation, where it started to feel like we are being decollectivized, pulled out of our workplaces, sent back. There was a moment where I felt like this is like taking in work. We're all being turned into individual small contractors, and we're all being turned into people who can now, rather than being together in a workplace or being together in a union, we can sort of, the competition between individual workers is being pitched much, much higher. You look at it in transportation industry, what's happened with Lyft drivers and Uber drivers. You look at it in teaching, where now, you can teach from anywhere in the world. It's certainly happened with, outsourcing through technology work for many, 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 many years. With the food services, like these giant kitchens being created now, where, many restaurants could be happening under one roof, and it doesn't really matter what restaurant it is. I think in every level, people are starting to see the way their work doesn't have to rely on a workplace, and then how much that decollectivizes us. That level of, there's with lockdown and everything, there's an arm of sort of direct state repression, but I think the way that work is being changed is putting us into more direct competition immediately with each other, and sort of breaking down those bonds of solidarity that are more easily forged when you're in an actual workplace or in an actual union. And at the same time, now there's just that decentralization plus just increased competition for this, false, whether it's over healthcare or, not having enough oxygen in the hospital so that we can talk about how many people are going to die of COVID, or, increased unemployment, lack of access to basic needs. All of this is good for the capitalists. And is particularly in the United States, we've had such massively low levels of class struggle that I think this question about who we unite with and who we fight with is very, very, very abstract for someone like me who, knows these good stories about the Black Panthers and knows these good stories about what happened with the miners and the LGBT community. It's still very much a thing that's in my head, and to be quite honest, not in my heart. When I was confronted with the idea of going out to be at a protest with families who I have this idea might be particularly anti-union, or might be, which I'm pissed off at my union. My union's been wrong all school year, but I think there's a place where we're not at sort of the rubber meets the road in who are actually uniting with us. Very abstract the way it's kind of framed right now. I think individually it's about looking at talking to families one-on-one in twos and threes who may have perspectives that are potentially very anti-union, or something that may sound a little bit more right-wing. And I absolutely agree that we have to be talking to those people and uniting with them at this time.
I have a sense, right? We've discussed in this show what we think is going on, the whole restructuring of society for, ends that benefit the capitalist class of the world. And for me, understanding a lot of this stuff is super hard. I sometimes talk to this person named Alison McDowell, and I don't fully understand everything, even though I believe I have a certain capacity to just stick and, to a subject and dissect it. And so coming to the realization that not everyone has that, privilege or possibility. Some people are, just overwhelmed, and some people shut down when all these things are dumped on them. And so for me, it's about trying to make answers, or at least my answers, what I think, accessible to people. Because I do think that I reject this binary of right wing, left wing. I actually happen to think most of the world is right wing, conservative, not right wing, conservative. My family in Guatemala, and a lot of people that don't live in, liberal cities, they're actually conservative in values, but they know something is wrong. Something doesn't add up. And so I think that is our job, because again, just referring back to Allison, she said this quote that when you're put in a time and a place and you see things that others don't, it's your job to say something, to be loud. And I think that is our job, to be loud, to keep at it, as long as we can, to continue to try to have answers. And that includes respecting, people that we disagree with, right-wingers. But because this period, COVID, has actually shown me that there is more common ground with them than I thought there was. On the subject of guns, on the subject of taxes, on the subject, of dictatorship and control, liberty and individual expression. Because I think erroneously sometimes people think that we socialists don't want that, but no, we do. We want freedom. Like that's what I'm in, at least. In showing that, we are in the same fight for freedom. I think there is common ground. We just have different approaches, but I think that is our task, to talk to both, the right wing and the left. And at the moment, the right wing is easier to talk to, for me at least, than the left. And so finding that common ground and respecting them enough to disagree with them and say, I agree on these terms, but not because of those reasons. That's something I've learned from Lipson. And so hoping that gets us somewhere, and also understanding that I'm not here to impose anything on anyone else. I'm here to share my truth. I'm here to share what I understand, because this could happen or this is happening. And I think for me, that's my approach, and that's all we can really do.
So this has been a great discussion. And first of all, I want to thank everyone for being part of this. And I think hopefully we'll do something like this again, or we'll see each other again in some way. But I'd like people to finish up maybe with 1 or 2 minutes, just final thoughts they have about anything they'd like to say that they didn't get a chance to say today. And, Eduardo and myself will probably get a chance to talk, as well as, of course, Kenny. So AJ, if you could start that off.
Sure. I think the biggest challenge for me right now is that I'm trying to get in touch with as many sources and people and wrap my head around what is going on at this gigantic global level. But when I think about what it is that I need to do, it is so tiny and so local. And it is literally about, I am at my school. These are the group of coworkers I have around me. And what is the thing, given this gigantic picture that I'm trying to hold in my head, what is the thing I can do right here in high school? But I think especially for us being as isolated as we are in the Bay Area, it's not about like alliances and other groups and marches and rallies. It's really about like me going back to work and talking to my coworkers about doing that under terms that we want to do, or which families we feel like we can reach out and talk to about our fears about what school is going to look like in the fall. And I think that is definitely the case for us here in the Bay Area, and probably, the United States as a whole. The problem that we're trying to get our arms around is massive, but the next steps are very, very local and very small.
As a sort of concluding sort of comment, I guess I'd like to, as to what we can do concretely. I would encourage people to maybe there's not an anti-lockdown movement where you are locally, but certainly from our experiences out here is that yes, there might be conspiracy theorists involved. There might be some right-wingers involved in the anti-lockdown movement, but I wouldn't say that's the majority. The majority of people in the anti-lockdown movement are more for, say, civil rights or democratic rights, and for freedom of movement and things like this. So Marxists can go in there and work with them on that basis. There's no real reason why we can't work with them on that issue. Your socialists in there might cop a bit of flack initially, but not from the large majority. And so it's worth trying to involve, your workmates, any of your contacts in that, because the anti-lockdown movement, they do want the numbers, and they do honestly want anybody who is opposed to this lockdown agenda. So I think we need to do that. And I mean, while we still have, or certainly our organization still has the perspective of somehow out of that building a Marxist vanguard party or an international network of Marxist vanguard parties, I don't think we can't lose sight of that at the same time. But certainly, yeah, where it exists, it seems that there are possibilities. There's a lot of potentialities for this anti-lockdown movement to potentially win some victories. So yeah, that's what I'd encourage.
Thanks, Adam. David?
Well, I think the tasks in front of us, really, that the things that we're facing, it can seem very overwhelming and isolating, when you consider how few of us there are and what really needs to be done. So, first of all, I just want to say, just chatting and talking with comrades around the world is absolutely fantastic, and really raises my spirits. I think, broadly speaking, we all have broadly a common understanding of what we're facing. I think the key is, what are we going to do? And whilst I don't think there are any direct historical analogies to what we're facing, if we understand what it is, is some sort of fascism, then I think we can look back on kind of Trotsky's call for the anti-fascist united front, and that he called on the Social Democrats, the Communists, but also the Catholic Centre Party as well, which wasn't a socialist party, but it was a workers' party, right, of sorts. It had a proletarian base. And I think, like Adam said, when you go to these anti-lockdown events and marches, the people who you meet, they're just ordinary people, concerned citizens. A lot of them are working class. Yes, you might find people who are so-called conspiracy theorists or, actual anti-vaxxers, but for the most part, they're just ordinary people. A lot of parents, with young children. So the key thing is just to build your networks where you are locally, as well as, I guess, on a larger scale internationally, like what we're doing now over the internet. But the key thing is building up your network in your community, and I guess being prepared. So in the US, your best allies are going to be the constitutionalists, the patriots. Hey, at least they've got guns, right? I mean, in the UK, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. I think we have quite a compliant population. I think it stems back to World War II and the national government we had, and this whole stiff upper lip British kind of thing that we've got. It's not great, but that sometimes it feels like it's all lost, and then something happens, and the mighty will fall at some point. We just don't know when exactly, but we can make it happen.
Thanks, David.
Kenny?
What do you think, Kenny?
Yeah, I mean, for me at least, yeah, obviously we have to organize, and but for what reason is kind of the important thing to me. I think an important task for me is to explain explain my vision of what fascism is, because we have a very one-dimensional understanding of it, and we're facing a multi-dimensional world, right? Like a prison that is coming our way. And ultimately I am about democracy, and so if people prefer to stay connected to this matrix that is getting invented, if I don't show them something better, if I myself don't live a life within these constraints that's better than that matrix life, then why would people follow me? Why would people want to listen to me? So to me is both, yes, organizing, but also leading a life of, rejecting this world and showing why that is not healthy, why that is a prison, why that is not freedom. That to me is really important, to be able to reach anybody, and, whether it be right wing or progressive. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess for me, and it also has to be personal, right? Like if you're in this fight because you have something at stake, your own freedom. And so, if again, no one's gonna fight because, or at least not for a long term, if it's for someone else, you have to fight for yourself first in common association, with other people, because safety is in numbers ultimately. That's why I'm a socialist.
Thanks, Kenny. And you can go if you need to. Yeah.
I do. So nice to meet you all. Thank you. Hopefully we can do this again. And yeah, thank you.
Right,
Thanks, Kenny.
Tom?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what is said, especially what Kenny said, although I think I view it almost from a different perspective. I think a lot of us overestimate the right-wing content or orientation of the lockdown movement, both immediately and internationally. In Germany in particular, I was struck by, it still insisted, and much of the organized left-wing parties, which again are small, insist that these are right-wing movements. But a survey taken at German protests earlier in the year found that something like 20% were Green Party voters, 17% were Left Party voters, which is a radical left-wing party, more radical than left-wing parliamentary parties in the UK or America, and only 14% were AfD voters, this far-right party. And yet the media continue to insist. Like David said, when you go to these rallies and you speak with people, you don't find a far-right. There's a lot of people with confused ideas, with a lot of the, our culture is steeped with anti-communism. It's steeped with fascist conceptions of history that a lot of people have to shake off. But their basic orientation is to these fundamental principles, to democracy. I mean, this is core, I think, of the lockdown movement. And like Lenin said, right, the maximal call for democracy translates into the call for socialism. In practice, they become the same thing. And in the German media, we often hear that these groups are radicalizing. And even now, the Querdenker anti-lockdown movement is under surveillance. It's been reported by the Constitutional Protection Agency in Germany. They are radicalizing when you go to these protests, and that is people fundamentally questioning capitalist governments and even the capitalist system at these. But we get this perception, and just to give a personal anecdote, at the May Day rally in Berlin, myself and a comrade who is an anarchist from Hamburg, a picture was taken of us and posted on Twitter by some account that said, "Oh, you think that the free left are socialist? Look, these are two well-known Nazis from Halle an der Saale, this city in Germany." This complete fabrication that then, we got it down fairly quickly, but already feeds into this this spectacle that's constantly churning out this fabrication about our reality. And whenever we take the kangaroo court social media, which can defame anyone and can construct these impressions and what people are held guilty of, NATO is an extremist right-wing organization. The Democratic Party is an extremist right-wing organization. Organizing with them isn't some fundamental flaw that compromises your socialist credentials. As long as we accept this framing, we're stuck. And that's not even factoring in that if we can see massive protests in major European capitals, basically hidden by the media, right? We have very little idea, I think, still of the nature of the resistance that's going around the globe. I think we underestimate that the resistance that's already probably taking place and is there. So we just have to own this, right? That of course this is the clear left-wing position, and we can be, for sentimental reasons, oriented towards the parties of the left, which have been so insignificant already for so long and have failed to reach the masses. But it's the class struggle that produces the Marxist, not the Marxist that will produce the class struggle. And we have to engage directly and confront it and get out of the spectacle onto the street and into our workplaces and not let it dictate our perception of reality. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Tom. I guess I'll go, and then the one person who doesn't belong here, who's not a socialist, Eduardo, is going to finish up. We let you stay, Eduardo, because anyway.
Otherwise, I kick everyone off my show.
So I guess I'll start with so there are these terms: Marxism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, Leninism, Maoism, anarchism. And I think when leftists hear those, some of those terms made you have good associations, and some of those terms you suddenly had negative things, all right? But I think all of them share something in common at this moment: failure. They all share in common the fact that, by and large, all of us, and I'm not, but you hope you understand what I mean, all of us who are in this part of this tradition, our tradition has failed to understand this moment. And so that means we have to have some humility and some sense of like, wait, what the hell, what's going on with our politics that led to this? I don't have an answer to that, but I do think we need to lead that investigation to figure that out. And that has led me, I think some of us who are talking about associating with factors outside the progressive liberal wings. I don't think we're necessarily talking far right, but we are talking libertarian. We are talking, people who are pro-life, right? In terms of anti-abortions, it can mean somebody who's anti-union. It could mean somebody who who's concerned about immigrants coming across the border rather than welcoming, as I am, and so I do think that it's going to require that we're going to organize with those people. And I am jealous of, and then let me say something about organizing. I am jealous of Australia and Germany and Britain that we don't have these massive demonstrations of 100,000 or 70,000 for this stuff. But I also think we could get fooled by those demonstrations, because I still believe that we on the left, or we who are organizing consciously for socialism, again, we're not organizing against COVID to stop lockdown. We're organizing against COVID to stop lockdown and establish socialism. Like, that's the goal. And so we who are conscious of that are very small and very like a minority of a minority of minority. So I think when we talk about organizing, we are talking about people whose names we know. Like, we know their names. We might know what their favorite movies are. We might know like what their habits are because we're close to them. So I think we have to have that consciousness of the kind of organizing we're doing. It's very intimate right now. It's not about even parties per se. It's about people we know that we're doing something with. And we have to understand, even though the scale of the attack is massive, like a huge wave, we have to understand we are just building the beginnings of networks. That's my sense. But our role within that is how I'm organizing with these 3 people or 4 people connected right now to the establishment of socialism. Like, we have to be able to answer that question. And if we can't, then we should be trying to answer, like, how is the work that I'm doing with the Comité or with my 1 or 2 colleagues that I can find, how is that work connected to the immediate establishment of socialism? Because it's not, but I have to know that. Because if I don't, they don't know that. So who's fighting for socialism then? Who's trying to connect what we're doing today to the goal of workers' power, and really the only thing that can establish democracy, which is socialist revolution? So those are the things that I would summarize with. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Well, I'm not necessarily a socialist.
Ooh,
the only one.
Get out of here.
But I'm Mexican. And in Mexico, it's a different story from the USA and from most northern so-called first world countries. No? And Mexican people have a long struggle. And it's a mixed bag of conservatives and liberal and progressive politics in Mexico. And we have more parties like in Britain when people run for presidential candidates. And I think for me, just being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, I'm still licking my wounds from that time. And I'm licking my wounds even today with all of my progressive leftist liberal friends here in San Francisco. And I'm appalled, and I'm disheartened, and I'm still licking, like I said, licking my wounds. It's been a real heartbreak, this breakup between the left liberal politics of San Francisco that I have jumped into right after my Jehovah's Witness upbringing. And so I have found that my most important allies in the face of this, it seems to me, in this whole pandemic, has not been progressive liberal San Francisco who follows all of the identity politics, but more so finding it with the non-educated class. It's the people that I've really come to see as the people who don't buy into this, and I see myself, outline myself with them. And if we just see the trend, even with like the Trump supporters, not necessarily that I'm not a Trump voter or Trump supporter myself, but just even the populist movement that arose here in the USA by people. I mean, a lot of people voted for him. I just don't see how we could ignore that population to work with, because they are part of the working class. And so I do think that it's not the educated class that is going to liberate us. I don't think I've seen how they are now complicit in and acting as state police, as they snitch, as they are now, as we have seen with Andy, going out and organizing with families, and they have acted as, I've told Andy, we were just discussing last weekend, they have become more of like the police state. And just like the police is part of, I would say, workers, they are workers as well, but they are complicit in taking care and defending the ruling class. I think that a lot of professionals in the educated class are becoming this way today. So it's unfortunate. I love a lot of my leftist friends, but they have bought into this. And so I do think that we have to organize with people, and that's going to mean organizing with different people from different walks of life. And I'm very, I was also going to mention at one point the Welsh miners and the LGBT folk also, that in Britain, because that was my, I learned about that as well, that I do think that it's going to come to some organizing movement, and we're going to have to sort out our differences in that movement to be able to deal with the homophobia, the sexism, all of the racism, everything. But it's not in this identity politics. I have seen white friends of mine follow identity politics, suddenly shove me to the side and say, you're not the brown voice I need, because you are not, according to my agenda, you're not actually, you're not doing what, you're not stating and you're not saying what I need for my political agenda. And these are white political leftists that I consider to be friends, who are now pushing me to the side. The identity politics framework isn't working. And it's just further going to cause more racism, I realize, because it's going to be using us as props, as I think right now, as Kenny and I, the only person of color here on this panel. And so I do think that I'm seeing true colors come out during this time. And I'm a recovering liberal, a recovering leftist, and I should have learned better, having been Jehovah's Witness. And it's cringy now looking back at a lot of What's Left episodes that I think AJ would know about. But you know, it is a learning experience, and it's going to be more organizing that we're going to have to do together to be able to deal with the greater forces to come. No, it is what Tom did say. It's like the whole 9/11 blanket of the cloud that is now encompassed, embraced, or over this entire country, where everyone's just sort of this sleepy fog of non-resistance and taking it in. No,
Eduardo, I'll actually say that I was just actually telling somebody about this the other day. Like, it has been fascinating, and I've learned so much actually from listening to you and actually watching, like watching the podcast and through knowing you and talking to you, like actually seeing your ideas change. It can be very easy for me to think like I already had some sort of preset ideas and they just came preformed because I'm a Marxist and so whatever, but which obviously isn't true, as I've described my own journey through thinking about what's going on with today. But listening to you and being able to see very clearly like how where your ideas have changed, things you've held on to, things you've shifted on. I've learned a lot from watching this podcast. So I just want to say thank you.
Gracias.
Being willing to do that publicly, you know what I'm saying? Like,
it's very cringy watching it from the very start, though. Anyhow, I thank you, AJ. So I think this is a good place to wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Adam, David, Tom, everyone. It has been really encouraging having you all here. AJ, thank you always for showing up. It really is something to have everyone here because it is an politically isolating time at this time, no? And we'll see how this YouTube video fares in the YouTube world. If it will be censored or if it will taken down, then we hope that it'll be on the Odyssey or Libri or any other or BitChute for people.
Yeah, and the good thing is we won't know which one of you said the thing that was the magic thing that got our channel eliminated. So we can just say I'm going to blame it on Tom because I've been trying to marginalize him the whole time. So if it goes down,
it's right here of offenses.
You were asking for it, getting this many of us together.
Yeah,
I know. So-called virus.
I know. Who said that constantly? It was someone kept saying so-called. I thought that's going to get us shut down.
I'm going to edit so-called out. You're going to notice I'm going to edit so-called.
Yeah, or if it exists.
That's right. It was.
Oh my God! I was like, okay, here.
I mean, it was. All right. So I guess if we can just do this outro together, and then after that we'll say goodbye. Is that all right, everyone? Yeah. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please share your favorite episode, rate, review, subscribe, turn on your notifications, jot down our information. This channel is in jeopardy. On a podcast, Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, on channels BitChute, Libri, LBRY, Odyssey, ODYSEE, or YouTube for now. Oh, and Telegram. Now we are on Telegram, yes? And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher, and socialist Andy Lipson. And Tom, David, Adam, AJ, thank you very much for being on with us, and Kenny Cepeda as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, comrade.
Oh, it looks like the Brady Bunch almost.
Right.
We need a few more female-bodied people in here.
I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
that might help you.
All right, here we go.